A helicopter pilot filmed a 15-foot BIGFOOT carrying a hiker's remains in Alaska, and the government seized the footage immediately. The thermal camera showed something massive walking upright through the remote wilderness, carrying what looked like a human body over its shoulder. 15 feet tall, moving through impossible terrain like it was nothing. A wildlife photographer had vanished in that exact valley 6 days earlier. His camp was destroyed. Massive tracks circled his tent, then simply vanished at a cliff face. When the pilot reported what he filmed, federal agents confiscated everything and threatened his career. Why would they cover up evidence of something that doesn't exist? Your time here matters. Choosing stillness in a busy world makes you one of us. Thanks for being here. My name is Garrett Thorne, and I've spent the better part of 2 decades flying the Alaskan bush. After 12 years in the Air Force flying everything from cargo planes to search and rescue missions, I settled into commercial aviation work out of McGrath, Alaska. The transition from military to civilian life wasn't always smooth, but the skills I learned in the service prepared me well for the challenges of bush flying. For 18 years now, I've been running a small helicopter charter operation, primarily serving mining companies, geological survey teams, and occasionally search and rescue operations when called upon. The work keeps me busy year-round, though winter contracts are naturally more sparse. I've logged thousands of hours in these mountains, and I'd like to think I know every peak, valley, and weather pattern in the Kuskokwim Range. September 2019 started like any other month. I had a steady contract with Northstar Geological, flying their survey teams to various sites throughout the range. They were conducting mineral assessments for a potential mining operation, nothing unusual for this part of Alaska. I'd been working with their team for about 3 months at that point, making regular flights to drop off and pick up equipment, transport personnel, and occasionally assist with aerial photography of the survey sites. Over the years, I've encountered just about every type of wildlife Alaska has to offer from the air. Bears, moose, wolves, you name it, I've seen it. When you spend as much time in the wilderness as I have, you develop a pretty good sense of what's normal and what isn't. I've always prided myself on maintaining a practical, evidence-based approach to my observations. The Air Force trained that into me, and 18 years of bush flying has only reinforced it. That particular morning, I was preparing for what should have been a routine flight. Just another day of ferrying geologists and their equipment to various survey sites. The weather report showed clear skies with light winds, perfect flying conditions for the Kuskokwim Mountains. I was doing my pre-flight checks when Tom, one of the Northstar project managers, reminded me to test the FLIR system. The forward-looking infrared system was a relatively new requirement from the mining companies. They'd started insisting on it about 2 years prior, mainly for wildlife detection and avoidance. It's a useful tool, especially in low-light conditions, or when you need to spot warm bodies against the landscape. I'd used similar systems in the military, so I was comfortable with the technology. I powered up the FLIR and ran through the calibration sequence, watching the thermal imaging display flicker to life on my console. The system was working perfectly, showing clear thermal contrasts across the helipad and surrounding area. I'd done this check hundreds of times before, and there was nothing to suggest this flight would be any different from the countless others I'd made through these mountains. The helicopter was fueled and ready. MY flight plan was filed, and the survey team's equipment was loaded and secured. Everything was set for another routine day of flying in the Alaskan bush. I had no way of knowing that this particular September morning would change everything. I thought I knew about these mountains and what lives in them. I lifted off from McGrath just after 7 a.m. with Dave Chun and Mike Roberts, 2 of Northstar's senior geologists, in the back. The morning sun was still low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the Kuskokwim Range as we headed northwest toward their primary survey area. The site was about 40 miles from the nearest settlement, deep in a network of drainages that fed into the Kuskokwim River. The terrain below US was classic Western Alaska, a maze of valleys carved by ancient glaciers, with steep ridges covered in black spruce, giving way to patches of alder thickets in the lowlands. From 3,000 feet up, it looked deceptively accessible, but I knew better. The ground down there was a challenging mix of tussocks, boggy areas, and dense brush that made foot travel exhausting at best and dangerous at worst. Looking at about 10 minutes to your first drop point, I called back to Dave and Mike through the intercom. They acknowledged with thumbs up, already checking their sampling equipment. We'd been working this pattern for weeks. I'd drop them at predetermined GPS coordinates, then wait while they collected their samples and data before moving to the next site. The first landing zone was a small gravel bar along one of the tributary streams. I set the helicopter down gently, keeping the rotors turning as Dave hopped out with his gear. Mike would work a different section about 2 miles upstream. So after Dave was clear, I lifted off again and deposited Mike at his location, with both geologists safely on the ground and working their sites. I had about 2 hours to kill. This was standard procedure. I'd maintain radio contact while they worked, ready to extract them quickly if weather moved in or other problems arose. Over the years, I developed a habit of using these waiting periods to scan the surrounding area. With the FLIR system, it had started as a way to help wildlife photographers locate subjects, but it had become almost second nature now. I brought the helicopter to a hover about 800 feet up, giving me a good vantage point of both survey sites and the surrounding terrain. The FLIR display showed the usual thermal patterns, the cool blue of the stream water, warmer patches where the sun had heated exposed rock faces, and the occasional small heat signature of ground squirrels or other small mammals. That's when I noticed something odd in a deep ravine about half a mile east of Dave's position. The thermal imaging picked up a large heat signature moving through an especially dense patch of alders. At first, I assumed it was a moose, but something about the movement pattern didn't fit. Moose tend to avoid the thickest alder stands. Even they have trouble pushing through the tangled branches. This signature was moving smoothly through an area where the brush had to be at least 12 feet tall and nearly impenetrable. I adjusted the FLIR's settings to get a clearer image, making sure it wasn't just an equipment glitch. The signature remained clear and distinct, a large, warm mass that seemed to be moving with purpose through terrain that should have been nearly impassable. It was bigger than a bear, but moving in a way I'd never seen any known Alaska wildlife move. I adjusted the FLIR's gain settings and tightened the focus, trying to get a clearer view of whatever was moving down there. The thermal image sharpened, and my first thought was that I was looking at a grizzly bear that had reared up on its hind legs, something they'll do occasionally to get a better view or reach food. But the longer I watched, the more that explanation fell apart. The figure was maintaining its upright posture as it walked, something no bear does for more than a few steps. I've seen hundreds of grizzlies in my years of flying, and while they can stand, they always drop back to all fours for actual travel. This thing just kept walking, stride after deliberate stride, through that mess of alders like it was strolling down a sidewalk. I hit the record button on the FLIR system, making sure I was capturing what I was seeing. The thermal signature showed a massive bipedal form, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, based on the surrounding vegetation I could use for scale. Its heat signature was bright and consistent, indicating a warm-blooded creature, but its proportions were all wrong for any animal I knew. The arms were too long, hanging down past where knees would be, and the head seemed to sit directly on broad shoulders with little apparent neck. What really got my attention was that it appeared to be carrying something. There was a smaller heat signature draped over one shoulder, long and limp, maybe 4 feet in length. My first thought was that it might be carrying prey, but the way it was balanced and secured looked deliberate, almost human-like in its Efficiency. I ran through every possible explanation I could think of. Maybe it was a bear with an injury that forced it to walk upright, but the movement was too smooth, too practiced. A camera malfunction? I quickly ran the FLIR's built-in diagnostic check. Everything came back normal. Some kind of elaborate hoax? Out here 40 miles from anywhere, in terrain that would challenge even experienced backpackers. For 3 solid minutes, I recorded as the figure made its way through that alder thicket. Its gait was smooth and purposeful, showing none of the awkwardness you'd expect from something forced to walk in an unnatural way. It navigated around obstacles with what seemed like deliberate planning, occasionally using one long arm to push branches aside while keeping its burden steady with the other. The thermal imaging revealed other details that made less and less sense. The joint articulation in the legs was clearly humanoid, not ursine. Bears' joints move differently when they walk upright. I'd seen enough of them to know the difference. This thing's knees and hips flexed like those of a human or great ape, but its size and proportions didn't match either category. I kept the camera trained on it until it moved deeper into the ravine, where the angle and dense canopy finally obscured my view. When I checked the FLIR's timestamp, I'd recorded exactly 3 minutes and 22 seconds of footage. 3 minutes and 22 seconds of something that by any rational standard shouldn't exist. I tracked the figure's heat signature until it disappeared into what looked like a cave entrance set into the ravine wall. The opening was substantial, maybe 12 feet high, though from my angle I couldn't see how deep it went. The thermal imaging showed only blackness beyond the entrance, suggesting either significant depth or a sharp turn that blocked the sensor's line of sight. My radio crackled. "Garrett, we're wrapped up at Site 3, ready for pickup when you are." "Copy that," I responded, my mouth dry. "On my way." During the short flight to retrieve the geologists, my mind kept replaying what I'd witnessed. I'd seen plenty of unusual things in my flying career, weather phenomena, animal behavior that seemed strange until you understood the context, even a few things I still couldn't explain. But nothing like this. Once the team was aboard and we were heading back to base, I tried to sound casual. "Either of you hear about any unusual wildlife activity in this area lately?" Dr. Chun, the senior geologist, looked up from her notebook. "Actually, yes. Search and Rescue put out an alert about 6 days ago. Solo hiker missed their check-in at one of the wilderness cabins. Any sign of them?" I kept my voice neutral, though my hands tightened on the controls. "Not that I've heard," she replied, "but that's not unusual out here. People underestimate the terrain, get turned around. Sometimes they walk out on their own after a few days." Back at the hangar that evening, I transferred the FLIR footage to my laptop. The recording was clear, 3 minutes and 22 seconds of something that defied explanation moving through that drainage. I used the measurement software we normally employed for analyzing geological features to estimate the figures. Height against the surrounding vegetation. The alders in that area typically grow to about 12 feet, and this thing stood well above them in several frames. After multiple measurements using different reference points, I came to a shocking conclusion. The figure was between 14 and 15 feet tall. That measurement alone should have made me question the footage's authenticity, but I'd recorded it myself. I knew exactly what the camera's settings had been. Then I noticed something about its burden that turned my blood cold. Using the same measurement tools, I analyzed the smaller heat signature it carried. The proportions, the way it hung limply over the figure's shoulder. It was roughly the size of a human body. The thermal signature was cooler than the carrying figure, but still showed residual heat. As if I closed the laptop, not wanting to follow that thought to its conclusion. The missing hiker report from 6 days ago kept pushing its way into my mind, no matter how hard I tried to focus on more rational explanations. I sat there in the darkened hangar, the only sound the ticking of my helicopter's cooling engine. Trying to decide what to do with what I'd recorded, I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thermal image, the massive figure moving with impossible grace through terrain that should have stopped anything that size. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying and opened my laptop again. The missing hiker report wasn't hard to find. Bradley Newcomb, 34. From Anchorage. An experienced wildlife photographer whose work had appeared in National Geographic. He'd set out on September 8th for what was supposed to be a 3-day solo trek, planning to document seasonal wildlife movements in, my stomach clenched, the exact drainage system where I'd recorded the footage. According to the report, Newcomb had a satellite messenger device and had been sending regular check-ins until September 11th. His last known location placed him within 2 miles of where I'd seen the figure. The article included a photo of him, beard trimmed neat, eyes bright behind wireframe glasses, professional camera gear slung over his shoulder. He looked exactly like the kind of guy who knew what he was doing in the backcountry. I dug deeper, finding posts from local SAR forums. They'd been searching for 6 days now, hampered by deteriorating weather conditions. No sign of his camp, no emergency beacon activation, no response to aerial surveys. Just silence from a stretch of wilderness. That suddenly felt a lot darker than it had 24 hours ago. The weight of what I might know pressed down on me like a physical thing. If what I'd filmed was connected to Newcomb's disappearance, and the timing and location made that increasingly hard to ignore, I had information that could be crucial to the search effort. But sharing that footage would mean exposing myself to ridicule at best, and at worst, potentially jeopardizing my flying career. Who would trust a pilot who claimed to have filmed a 15-foot creature carrying what looked like a human body? I rubbed my eyes, exhausted but knowing sleep wouldn't come. The right thing to do was obvious, even if I didn't like it. Someone's son, brother, friend was missing out there. Whatever consequences I might face, they didn't outweigh that simple fact. At 3:47 a.m., I pulled up the Alaska State Troopers website and found their tip line number. My hand shook slightly as I dialed. The phone's glow the only light in my small apartment. Alaska State Troopers tip line, a professional voice answered. Yes, I cleared my throat. I need to report possible evidence related to the Bradley Newcomb missing person case. Go ahead, sir. My name is Garrett Thorne. I'm a commercial helicopter pilot based out of McGrath. Yesterday afternoon, while conducting a geological survey in the search area, I recorded something on my aircraft's FLIR system that you need to see. There was a pause, the sound of typing. And what exactly did you record, Mr. Thorne? I took a deep breath, knowing these next words would change everything. Something that might explain why you haven't found him yet. The troopers arrived at my hangar just after sunrise. I recognized the older one, Sergeant Mills, from previous search and rescue operations. His partner, Trooper Chun, was new to the area. They carried themselves with the practiced casualness of law enforcement, trying not to draw attention. Mr. Thorne, Mills nodded, his weathered face neutral. Mind walking us through what you reported? I led them to my office, a cramped space that smelled of coffee and aviation fuel. My laptop was already set up with the footage queued. Chun positioned himself by the door while Mills pulled up a chair beside me. This was captured yesterday at approximately 1400 hours, I explained, keeping my voice steady as I hit play. Standard FLIR thermal imaging system, fully calibrated and operational. The familiar sequence began, the massive heat signature emerging from the tree line, bipedal gait unmistakable. Mills leaned forward, his professional detachment slipping for just a moment. When the figure disappeared into the cave system, he asked me to replay it 3 times. Flight logs? He requested. I handed over my documentation, coordinates, timestamps, weather conditions, everything by the book. Shun took photos while Mills made several calls. Speaking in clipped tones, I couldn't quite make out. Within 2 hours, a chartered Cessna touched down, bringing 2 investigators from Anchorage. They introduced themselves as special agents Walker and Martinez from a joint task force I'd never heard of. Something about their demeanor set off warning bells. They weren't surprised by what they saw. They'd seen something like this before. "We'll need you to come down to the station," Walker said. It wasn't a request. The next 3 hours felt like being back in the Air Force during security clearance interviews. They wanted every detail, exact coordinates, weather conditions, wind direction, any anomalous instrument readings. They were particularly interested in my background, my experience identifying wildlife, and whether I'd ever seen anything similar before. "Have you shared this footage with anyone?" Martinez asked for the 3rd time. "Your clients? Other pilots? Social media?" "No," I repeated. "Just you and the troopers." They exchanged glances. Walker pulled out a thick document. "We'll need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement. It's a federal offense to share any information about what you recorded or this interview." "What about the missing hiker?" I asked. "His family deserves to know if there's evidence. The Newcomb case is now part of an ongoing federal investigation." Martinez cut in. "Any disclosure could compromise both the investigation and public safety. Do you understand?" I understood. They were telling me to keep my mouth shut. As I signed the NDA, I noticed my hands were steady. Somehow, their intensity and the official response made it all more real. Whatever I'd seen up there, these people knew exactly what it was. They kept my laptop for analysis but assured me it would be returned. Before they let me leave, Walker had one final question. "Mr. Thorne, do you still have flights scheduled in that drainage system?" 3 days of silence felt like an eternity. I kept flying my regular routes, avoiding the drainage system where I'd made the recording. Every time my radio crackled, I expected more questions from the authorities. The call came on a Wednesday. "Evening. Garrett? This is Jack Morrison, SAR coordinator for the Newcomb search." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "Got a minute to talk?" "Of course." I moved away from my helicopter, where I'd been doing maintenance checks. "Listen, what I'm about to share, it's not in any public report. But after seeing your footage," he paused, gathering his thoughts. "We found Newcomb's campsite 2 days before your flight. It wasn't a bear attack like we initially suspected." The hair on my neck stood up. "What did you find?" "The tent." Morrison's voice dropped lower. "It was destroyed from the inside out. Like something had been in there with him. But here's the thing, we found these massive depressions around the camp. Perfect circle, about 40 feet in diameter. Like something had been walking around the tent all night." I remembered the methodical way the figure in my footage had moved. "The camera equipment? That's another thing. High-end stuff worth maybe 15 grand. We found pieces scattered across 300 yards, leading to this cliff face. Some of it looked deliberately placed. Not scattered by an animal." He took a deep breath. "The tracks just stopped at the cliff. And these weren't any tracks I've ever seen in 23 years of search and rescue." "What do you mean, they were?" He struggled for words. "Wrong. Just wrong. Too big, wrong number of toes, stride length impossible for any known animal. And they just vanished at the cliff, like whatever made them could." He didn't finish the thought. "Have you seen anything like this before?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Morrison was quiet for so long I thought we'd lost connection. "Twice," he finally said. "Once in 2012, once in 2016. Different locations, but the same pattern. Circular depressions around destroyed camps. Personal items spread out in ways that seemed purposeful, and tracks that defied explanation. What happened to those cases, officially? Animal attacks, exposure, misadventure. We're instructed to avoid any speculation in our reports. But off the record, he lowered his voice further. Something's out there, Garrett. Something that knows we're looking for it. Why are you telling me this? Because you've seen it too now. And because, he hesitated. Because Bradley Newcomb wasn't just some unprepared hiker. He was looking for these things. His sister showed me his research after we found the camp. He'd been tracking patterns of disappearances, gathering evidence. And now, the radio crackled with static, making me jump. When it cleared, Morrison's tone had changed. I should go. Just be careful up there. And Garrett? We never had this conversation. After Morrison's call, I couldn't let it go. I spent my evenings filing Freedom of Information Act requests, digging through decades of missing person reports from the Kuskokwim region. The pattern emerged slowly at first, then with disturbing clarity. Marcus Chun, 1976, solo photographer, camp destroyed. Large predator disturbance noted, but no conclusive wildlife signs. James Walker, 1981, experienced hunter, gear scattered. In a 300-yard radius, unusual tracks observed but deteriorated due to weather. Thomas Reed, 1987, geologist, campsite found with circular pattern of ground disturbance. Case classified as possible bear encounter, despite no bear signs present. The reports went on, about one every 4 to 5 years. Each followed the same template: solo outdoorsman, experienced in wilderness travel, vanishing in that same drainage system. Every report contained that phrase, large predator disturbance. But never once did investigators find conclusive evidence of bears or wolves. Started asking around at the pilot bars, places where bush pilots gather after their runs. Most wouldn't talk at first, but after a few beers, the stories would come out. Strange thermal signatures on their instruments, radio interference in clear weather, glimpses of something massive moving through the trees that didn't match any known wildlife. That's how I found Hank Riverside. 71 years old, retired now, but he'd flown these mountains for 35 years. When I mentioned the drainage system, his weathered face went pale. 1987, he said, nursing his bourbon. I was doing wildlife surveys for Fish and Game. Clear day, perfect visibility. He pulled out an old logbook, pages yellow with age. April 15th. I saw them from about 800 feet up a line of tracks in the snow, coming up from that same valley you're talking about. What kind of tracks? Bipedal. Stride length about 8 feet. Each print. He shook his head. Each print was nearly 3 feet long. I had a camera with me, one of those old Nikons. Took 12 shots before the film ran out. What happened to the photos? Hank's laugh was bitter. Reported it like a good citizen. 2 days later, 2 men showed up at my hangar. Said they were from the Department of Interior. Showed me badges I'd never seen before or since. Took my camera, my logbook, everything. Made me sign some papers. He leaned forward, voice dropping. But here's the thing, I made copies of the logbook, and I'd already developed one of the photos. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn envelope. Been carrying this for 32 years, waiting for someone else to see what I saw. The photograph was grainy, shot from altitude, but I could make out what he was showing me. In the snow-covered valley, a line of tracks stretched for nearly half a mile. Bipedal. Massive. Just like the figure I'd caught on thermal. There's more of us, Hank said quietly. Other pilots who've seen things, most won't talk about it. But we keep records, we watch, we wait. Rebecca Newcomb contacted me through the search coordinator. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Anchorage, away from the usual crowds. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was an intensity to her that reminded me of her brother's photographs, sharp, focused, searching for something just out of frame. Bradley wasn't just taking wildlife photos, she said. Pulling out a leather-bound journal. He'd been interviewing native elders in the region for months. They told him stories about something in those mountains. Something that's been there for generations. She opened the journal, revealing pages of meticulous notes, sketches of tracks, coordinates, detailed accounts from various tribal sources, all pointing to the same drainage system where I'd filmed the figure. The elders called it, "the one who walks alone," Rebecca continued. They said it's territorial but not necessarily hostile unless provoked. Bradley was convinced he could document it, prove what they were saying was true. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. These are his last satellite messages. I haven't shown them to the authorities yet. I wasn't sure they'd understand. I leaned in to read the screen. The messages started 6 days before his disappearance. September 14, 2019. 7:43 p.m. Found unusual tree structures. Definitely not natural. Will photograph at dawn. September 15, 2019. 2:17 p.m. Strange sounds last night, like wood knocking. Getting closer. September 16, 2019. 6:52 p.m. Something's watching the camp. Can feel it. Then the final message, sent. At 9:16 p.m. on September 17th. Found fresh tracks, massive, following them at first light. That was the night before I filmed the figure. There's something else, Rebecca said quietly. Something Bradley only told me. She took a deep breath. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less. That's why he was pushing so hard, taking risks. He wanted to prove something extraordinary before. Her voice trailed off. I thought about the thermal footage. The careful way the figure had moved through that difficult terrain. The burden it carried. Rebecca, I said carefully, when they found Bradley's campsite, his camera equipment was scattered over 300 yards. But the search team said there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no body, she finished. I know. And those circular depressions around the camp. Bradley had sketched similar patterns in his journal. He thought they were some kind of territorial marking. The realization hit me like a physical weight. Bradley hadn't just been looking for evidence, he'd found it. And whatever he'd encountered might have recognized his intent, understood his pursuit. The way the figure had carried its burden toward that cave system seemed almost purposeful. The elders, Rebecca said, reading my expression. They always insisted these beings had their own customs, their own way of handling death. Some even believed they collected their dead, took them to special places in the mountains. I stared at the final message on her phone, following them at first light. Bradley had gotten exactly what he was looking for. The question now was, had something been looking for him too? I couldn't shake the feeling that Bradley, Newcomb's final pursuit, and my thermal footage were connected to something bigger. After meeting with Rebecca, I reached out to 2 pilots I trusted, Jack Morrison and Pete Callahan, who'd been flying these mountains as long as I had. We planned a careful reconnaissance of the drainage system where I'd captured the footage. 3 angles of approach, I explained, spreading the topographic map across my kitchen table. We coordinate our fuel stops, maintain radio contact, and document everything. No heroics, just eyes on the ground. Jack nodded, tracing the ridgeline with his finger. I can come in from the north, use the mining survey permit as cover if anyone asks questions. We set the date for October 12th, early morning when the light would be good for photography. I spent a week preparing, mounting additional cameras on my helicopter and double-checking every system. But 2 days before our planned flight, everything changed. The first sign was a notice to airmen, NOTAM, declaring the entire region a restricted zone. The official reason, wildlife population study in progress. I'd never seen anything like it, a last-minute closure of that size without prior coordination with local operators. Pete called me that afternoon. Just got turned back by some serious hardware, he said, his voice tight. 2 Black Hawks escorted me out. They're not fish and game, Garrett. These guys are military. I made some calls to contacts at the regional FOO office. No one would speak officially, but a friend who owed me a favor whispered about a specialized unit being deployed within hours of my footage being reviewed. Some kind of rapid response team, she said. They're calling it a training exercise. But the paperwork's classified. That night, I noticed a dark SUV parked across from my hangar. When I walked out to check the mail the next morning, it was gone, replaced by another identical vehicle with different plates. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. I started moving carefully, documenting everything. I copied all my research, the historical missing persons cases, the patterns I'd found, Bradley's sister's testimony, onto multiple drives. I gave one to my lawyer in Anchorage, sent another to a journalist friend in Seattle, and buried a third in my father's old cabin outside McGrath. Each package included copies of the thermal footage and detailed notes about every interaction since I'd reported it. If anything happens to me, I told my lawyer, or if I suddenly change my story, these need to go public. She looked at me like I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But I'd seen the way those federal agents had swarmed the area. I'd watched military helicopters replace civilian search and rescue teams. Something about what I'd captured on that thermal camera had triggered a response far beyond what a simple wildlife sighting should warrant. The pressure was building. I could feel it in every restricted flight plan, every dark vehicle that lingered too long, every carefully worded suggestion from local authorities to drop the matter. They were tightening the net, and I needed to be ready when they finally made their move. The calendar read November 3rd when they finally came for me. I was finishing my pre-flight checks, another routine morning at the hangar, when 2 black Suburbans pulled up outside. 4 men in dark suits emerged, their government credentials catching the early light as they approached. Mr. Thorne, we need to discuss your September 19th flight recordings. The lead agent, Harrison, according to his ID, spoke with the practiced smoothness of someone used to delivering uncomfortable news. Is there somewhere private we can talk? I led them to my office, a cramped space cluttered with maps and maintenance logs. They didn't sit when offered. Harrison placed a thick document folder on my desk while the others positioned themselves near the door. We're here to resolve some concerns about unauthorized disclosures of sensitive information, Harrison began. Your thermal footage from September has been classified as part of an ongoing federal investigation into environmental activism and potential eco-terrorism hoaxes in the region. I kept my face neutral. Hoaxes? That footage was authenticated by state troopers. Mr. Thorne, Harrison's tone shifted slightly. Several resource development projects are pending approval in that area. We've seen an uptick in sophisticated attempts to disrupt these projects through manufactured wildlife concerns, some using quite advanced technical methods. He opened the folder and slid out a document heavy with legal language. This is a non-disclosure agreement. Signing it indemnifies you from any potential liability while ensuring operational security for our investigation. And if I don't sign? The second agent, who hadn't introduced himself, stepped forward. We've reviewed your medical records, Mr. Thorne, including your father's history of early onset dementia. The FAA takes family medical history very seriously when evaluating pilot certification, especially regarding conditions that could affect perception and judgment. The threat was clear. My father's condition had appeared in his mid-50s. I was 48. We're also aware, Harrison added, that nearly 80% of your current contracts involve government agencies or their subsidiaries. It would be unfortunate if concerns about reliability led to a review of those arrangements. My throat felt dry. 18 years of building this business, my reputation, all of it balanced on the edge of a pen. I thought about the copies I'd distributed, the evidence safely stored away. But what good would that do if I couldn't fly? The agreement is straightforward, Harrison continued. You'll cease all investigation into the September 19th incident. Any copies of the footage or related materials will be surrendered. In exchange, you maintain your current operational status and contracts. We can even arrange some additional survey work to offset any inconvenience. I picked up the document, scanning its dense paragraphs. How many others have signed these? That information is classified, Harrison replied smoothly. But I can say that cooperation has been universal once the situation is properly explained. The second agent moved closer. Consider your position carefully, Mr. Thorne. You have an excellent safety record, strong relationships with federal contractors. It would be regrettable to see that compromised by pursuing unsubstantiated claims about impossible creatures. I looked at the signature line, then at the men watching me with practiced patience. Everything I'd built, my entire life in the bush, rested on my pilot's license and professional credibility. They knew exactly where to apply pressure. Harrison placed an expensive pen on top of the agreement. We can resolve this quickly, Mr. Thorne. Then everything goes back to normal. As if September 19th never happened. I signed their paper with steady hands, though my insides churned with rage. They left me with a copy of the NDA, a business card with a direct line, should any questions arise, and the clear understanding that I was being watched. But they didn't know Alaska like I did. Out here, information flows through channels older than any government agency. 2 weeks after signing, I met Calvin Whitehorse at the McGrath Diner. He'd retired from the Forest Service 3 years ago. After 32 years of service, most of it spent in the Coquitlam Range. We'd crossed paths dozens of times during search and rescue operations, and he'd always struck me as a man who knew more than he let on. Heard you had some visitors, he said, stirring his coffee. The diner was nearly empty, just a few locals. At the counter far from our booth. Same ones who came to see me in '92. I kept my voice low. I can't discuss specific incidents. Calvin nodded. Course not. But you can listen. He pulled out a worn leather notebook. My grandmother was Denaina. She used to tell stories about the Tall Ones beings that lived in the deep places, the cave networks that run through these mountains like veins. He opened the notebook, revealing hand-drawn maps. These lava tubes, they're far more extensive than any official survey shows. The one he caught himself, the one near that recent search area, it connects to a system that runs for miles. Our people have known about them for generations. Known to stay away too. Why? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The Tall Ones consider it their territory. They're intelligent, organized. They don't attack randomly, but they do enforce boundaries. Usually they clone travelers who venture too close to certain areas. Always singles, never groups. Like they're sending a message. I thought about Bradley Newcomb's final text message. About the pattern in the missing persons reports. Calvin leaned forward. In '69, before my time with the service, they found a research station up there torn apart. 3 geologists missing. The official report blamed a bear, but I saw the photos years later. No bear walks on 2 legs and methodically dismantles equipment. What happened to the photos? Same thing that happens to all the evidence. It disappears. Been happening since at least the '60s. I had a colleague in '86 who documented unusual tracks near one of the cave entrances. Next day, men in suits showed up. Classified it as part of some geological survey. The photos, plaster casts, everything gone. He turned more pages in his notebook, showing sketches of massive footprints, strange stick formations, and detailed maps of cave entrances. Our elders say the Tall Ones have been here since the Great Ice retreated. They stay mostly underground, come out mainly at night. They're stronger than any human, can see in the dark, and they're far more numerous than anyone suspects. Why doesn't the government acknowledge them? I asked. Calvin closed his notebook carefully. Think about it. An intelligent, indigenous species that predates human settlement? One that's clearly capable of defending its territory. The legal implications alone would shut down every development project in the region. Mining rights, timber contracts, oil exploration, all of it would have to be reconsidered. He slipped the notebook back into his jacket. The government's response has been consistent for decades. Suppress, discredit, classify. They can't eliminate the beings. They've tried, so they settle for keeping them secret. Anyone who gets too close either signs papers or has accidents. I thought about the NDA sitting in my safe. About the threats barely veiled as concerns. Your father, Calvin said quietly. He saw them too, didn't he? Back when he was ranging? I nodded slowly. He tried to tell me near the end. I thought it was the dementia talking. It wasn't. Calvin stood, leaving a few dollars for his coffee. Be careful, Garrett. They're watching you now. But if you want to know more, there are people who've been documenting these things for generations. People who don't sign government papers. He left me with a name written on a napkin, and the growing certainty that what I'd filmed was just the surface of something far deeper and darker than I'd imagined. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November. My hands trembled slightly as I read the formal notice from the FAA. My medical certification was under review due to multiple reports of concerning behavior. They'd scheduled a hearing for the following week. I knew immediately who was behind it. In the months since signing the A, I'd been careful but persistent, quietly gathering historical accounts from other pilots and old-timers in the region. Always casual conversations, never mentioning my own experience directly. But someone had been watching, documenting every inquiry, every conversation, building a case. The hearing room felt more like an interrogation chamber. 3 FA medical examiners sat behind a long table, their faces professionally neutral as they reviewed a thick folder of evidence. My attorney, Jim Reeves, sat beside me, but I could tell from his tight expression that the situation was worse than we'd anticipated. Mr. Thorne, the lead examiner began, we have reports from multiple sources expressing concern about your mental state over the past 3 months. You've been observed displaying signs of paranoid behavior, including persistent questioning about historical wildlife sightings, claims of government surveillance, and apparent obsession with cave systems in restricted areas. They had everything. Every conversation I'd had with other pilots about strange sightings, every FOIA request I'd filed, even transcripts of my meetings with Calvin Whitehorse, though they'd twisted his indigenous knowledge into folklore-based delusions. Your own flight logs show multiple deviations from planned routes to photograph remote locations, another examiner noted. And you've been stockpiling copies of documentation with various associates, suggesting paranoid thinking patterns. Jim touched my arm lightly, our agreed signal to let him handle the response. My client has maintained exemplary safety records for 18 years, he said. These recent research activities, while perhaps overzealous, have never compromised his judgment during flight operations. But they weren't finished. They produced statements from 2 pilots I'd interviewed, now claiming I'd seemed unhinged and fixated on conspiracy theories. I recognized the language too polished, too similar. They'd been pressured into making these statements. Mr. Thorne, the lead examiner leaned forward, we're prepared to continue your certification, conditional on 2 requirements. First, a public statement acknowledging that stress and isolation led you to misinterpret certain events and engage in unnecessary speculation. Second, mandatory psychological counseling for 6 months. The choice crystallized before me, my reputation or my livelihood. 18 years of building trust with clients, of knowing every peak and valley in this territory, all hanging by a thread. I thought of my mortgage, my employees' families, the communities that depended on my service. I need a moment with my client, Jim requested. In the hallway, he laid it out bluntly. They've built their case carefully, Garrett. Fight this, and they'll pull your medical suit completely. Best case, you spend years and every penny you have in appeals. I thought of my father then, the former ranger who'd taken his own strange experiences to the grave rather than risk his pension. I judged him for that silence once. Now I understood. Back in the hearing room, I read their prepared statement in a steady voice. Recent stress and professional pressure led me to engage in unnecessary speculation about routine events. I acknowledge that isolation and excessive research into historical incidents caused me to draw unwarranted conclusions. I'm committed to focusing solely on my professional duties going forward. They seemed satisfied with my surrender. My medical certification was renewed with the condition of monthly counseling sessions. But as I signed their forms, I felt something break inside me, not dramatically, but quietly, like a frozen branch giving way under too much snow. That night, alone in my hangar office, I stared at the coordinates I'd marked on my maps, knowing what was out there. Knowing I could never speak of it again. The package arrived with no return address, just my name and hangar number written in block letters. Inside, wrapped in bubble wrap, was a single SD card in a weathered plastic case. My hands went cold when I saw the label, B. Newcomb, Kuskokwim Survey, September 2019. I hadn't spoken about the incident in 2 years. The monthly counseling sessions had finally ended, and I'd managed to rebuild my reputation by keeping my head down and my mouth shut. But every time I flew past that drainage system, I felt the weight of what I'd seen and what I'd been forced to deny. With trembling fingers, I inserted the card into my laptop. Most files were corrupted, but several dozen images remained intact. The first few showed typical wildlife photography, moose tracks, eagle nests, distant wolf packs. Then the tone changed. A series of massive footprints in muddy soil, each nearly 24 inches long, with clear dermal ridges visible in the morning dew. A crude shelter made from bent saplings, too high for any human to reach. Stone tools arranged in deliberate patterns near a creek bed dot. My throat tightened as I clicked through more photos. Bradley had documented everything methodically, including scale markers and GPS coordinates in each frame. He'd been building an evidence case, just as I had tried to do. Then I saw it. Frame 147. A dark figure standing motionless among the trees. Partially obscured, but unmistakable in its massive height and proportion. The timestamp showed 5:47 a.m., dawn light just breaking through the canopy. Bradley had used a telephoto lens. He'd known better than to get too close. The final image made my blood run cold. Taken at 6:03 a.m., badly blurred, tilted at an angle, suggesting Bradley had been running. But there in the frame, emerging from the morning mist between two spruce trees, was a form that matched exactly what I'd seen on my FLIR camera that day. Someone had recovered this card, someone who knew where to look. Someone who wanted me to know that everything I'd seen, everything I'd been forced to deny, was real. But the NDA's terms were explicit. Sharing any evidence related to the incident would result in immediate federal prosecution. I stared at that final photo for a long time, understanding now why Bradley had ventured so deep into that drainage alone. He'd found exactly what he was looking for. And someone wanted me to carry that truth, even if I could never share it. I still fly charters across Alaska, but I haven't taken a job in the Kuskokwim drainage since that day. The Geological Survey Company switched to drone mapping for that region anyway, officially due to cost efficiency. But I've wondered if someone advised them to keep pilots away from those coordinates. The wilderness looks different to me now. Where I once saw empty terrain between settlements, I now see possible territories, cave systems, places where something could exist undisturbed for centuries. Every time I spot a game trail from the air or notice unusual movement in the tree Canopy, I remember that thermal footage. I remember Bradley Newcomb's final photos. The burden of knowing while staying silent has become part of who I am. Some nights I wake up thinking about that memory card, about who recovered it and why they sent it to me. Other pilots have noticed I won't take certain routes, but I've learned to deflect questions with talk about fuel efficiency or wind patterns. The counselors would say I'm well adjusted now. Really, I've just gotten better at carrying the weight. I've taken precautions though. Everything, the original FLIR footage, Bradley's photos, my research notes, the missing persons reports, is backed up in multiple locations. My lawyer has detailed instructions to release it all if anything happens. To me, maybe someday, when I'm gone, the full story can emerge without the constraints that bind me now. The truth deserves to be known, even if I can't be the one to tell it. But I need to leave a warning for others, especially the solo hikers and photographers who venture deep into these territories. There are mysteries in this wilderness that shouldn't be pursued. Bradley Newcomb thought he was documenting something extraordinary, and he was right, but that knowledge cost him everything. We humans have convinced ourselves we're the apex predators in every environment we enter. In these mountains, that assumption can be fatal. There are places in Alaska where the wilderness doesn't belong to us, where we're not welcome to explore or document or understand. Places where being alone makes you pray. I've seen what lives in those shadows. I've watched it move through terrain that would challenge our best climbers, watched it carry a grown man like a child's doll. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest service you can offer is to point to a blank spot on the map and say, simply, don't go there. If this story lingered with you, subscribe. I'll return tomorrow with more.